Gary, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
We have a pretty good agenda today. And what I'm going to skip a little bit because we have the warrant that we needed to talk about. Scott actually has a long-range financing plan for wastewater. He's been working on a 25-year plan, which he's starting to really, I think, get some substance around. We also have been, the Board of Selectmen have requested that we, come meet with them, and they're proposing a joint session outside of a regular Board of Selectmen meeting, which I think is makes a lot of sense. There's an awful lot to talk through here in terms both of the warrant item and how wastewater is likely to affect the town for the next 25 years. And anyway, I'm glad that they think that that's a good idea because there's a lot of meat there. The other thing on the agenda is the Board of Health regulation. And with that, what I also wanted to talk about was, and this is probably under the warrant item, Harry Chirkanian is going to be speaking with the Board of Selectmen this evening and advocating for the use of the short-term rental tax income, which is somewhere between $300,000 and $500,000 a year for the town. And I'm not sure exactly what he's going to advocate, but he was going to be advocating for the use of those funds for housing purposes. And so I did want to bring that up, especially since Gary's here, to kind of talk through financing options for affordable housing versus wastewater and how we might sort of work together and not end up at cross purposes on funding going forward. So Gary, I don't know what, exactly what Harry has in mind or what
Sure, I can tell you.
Or maybe you know a little more about that.
Sure, I can give it. So at the last town meeting in September, we voted to create a new affordable housing trust. There was new state legislation that came down. We had a trust previously, but it was a specialized one that was done 20 years ago for Wellfleet, and it had some limitations. And so we proposed adopting the new state regulations regarding a trust fund, and that's a fund of the town to support affordable housing. So that did go forward, and what Harry is proposing is on behalf of the trust fund, and he is the chair of that trust fund now, that a portion or a majority of the short-term rental tax be set aside for affordable housing. And obviously the linkage there is that the B&B tax and the amount of money that people can bring in from that exacerbates the lack of affordable rentals, as well as actually impacts home ownership, because we've seen many places that were formerly rentals that have now been sold to out-of-towners and are being used both as summer homes and as short-term rental opportunities. So it's exacerbated both sides of the equation. I don't believe it's at all inconsistent that we couldn't ask for that jointly going forward, since wastewater clearly is and supports affordable housing. And I believe that short-term rental tax actually has language in it supporting wastewater.
Yeah. The original legislation was drafted by the legislature specifically for wastewater.
Yeah.
It's bringing in around 300 to 500,000 thereabouts. I've asked Heather a couple of times, and she's said it's in the 300 range, but who knows?
It's slightly in excess of 500,000 for the last time we have an accounting for it. We're all sort of waiting for the new audit report that should be coming out for the end of the month to tell us more.
Okay, finally. But there's also a provision in that short-term rentals tax. The legislature did authorize the town to include or add an additional 3%, which is called a community impact fee. And that community impact fee is specifically related to what you just talked about, Gary, the impact of, growth within certain towns really affecting affordable housing, and especially it's exacerbated in Wellfleet, as you described. That particular 3%, the legislative provision requires that if the town, in fact, votes for that additional 3%, 35% is designated to go to affordable housing. So there's already a provision in that legislation that would fund and should fund directly the trust. But we have to adopt it. We haven't adopted it yet.
Right. I don't know. Obviously, I don't know what the select board is going to decide. That's in addition to, is that 3 on top of 6, Kurt?
3, it's 3 on top of 6. Yeah.
It'd be effectively a 9% tax.
Yeah.
I don't know what the town's position is on that.
Yeah, so, and let me, for both you and Elaine's benefit, just quickly switch over. I think, let me just share my screen for a second here. What I wanted to show you was kind of what we've been talking about for some time, relative to, funding wastewater. And if you look at, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay. So we're talking right now for this particular go round, we've now increased the 95 Lawrence wastewater treatment project to 1.9 million. The idea behind that is to include, as we discussed at our last meeting, the incremental cost of the cluster sewer system, which is the portion that would cover the school, fire, police additions to the system. There's also a 52,746 amount that the town's going to have to figure out where that's going to come from to operate the system. And this is over and above what the contribution that would be coming from the project developer, which was, and those figures are outlined in the on-site report. So that's where these numbers are coming from. In addition to that, kind of what we've been targeting or thinking about for the Airbnb or the short-term rental tax money was to fund this, innovative and alternative septic program, which, is something like, we're anticipating that somewhere between 50 and 60 systems a year are being added to the town of Wellfleet. And of those 50 or 60, if we had a Board of Health regulation that required that they use an innovative alternative septic system, it would be about $500,000 with a $10,000 credit for those people upgrading those systems. So, that's kind of where and that doesn't include the fact that we're going to have to continue to monitor and and test those systems for at least some period of time. DEP is going to require that. So just looking at these, these two components, that's kind of where we had, envisioned some of this short-term rental tax money going.
Have you had that discussion with the Board of Selectmen, the select board now?
We are scheduled to have a joint session with them. So that hasn't exactly happened yet, but.
Concept here that short-term rental money, there's a lot of people with their eyes on it.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's been going into the general fund up till now. And so probably people are saying, why aren't we using that? Why shouldn't we have that? Not just housing.
So, and when it was originally created, the short-term rental tax, what were the proceeds identified for? Was it for housing and wastewater, or is it for wastewater specifically? I can't remember. 5%
of it goes directly to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, siphoned right off the top for general fund purposes. 6%, up to 6%, and this is an election for the town to make, but the towns were allowed to opt into up to 6%, which would go for general purposes for the town. It wasn't designated. There's 2.75% that goes to the Cape and Islands Water Protection Fund. And that amount of money is designated specifically for wastewater and specifically for the Cape. It was the real genesis of this bill in the first place. The bill was especially for the Cape to address, wastewater needs. In addition to that, I did just mention, Fred, a second ago, but there is an additional 3% that the municipality can opt into. Does require a vote of the town, but that additional 3% is called a community impact fee. It's allowed under the legislation. And if the town opts into that 3%, 35% by law it will be designated to affordable housing. So that provision's already in the legislation if the town opts into the community impact fee. So there is a funding mechanism for affordable housing as well. In answer to your question, so that the bill did have elements of wastewater, it had elements of housing and general fund purposes.
So if I'm adding correctly, 14% tax total on short-term housing?
No.
11, 14, 16.75.
Pretty hefty.
Yeah, 16.75 if we opt in for the 3%. And I'm not sure, I can't remember what Wellfleet opted. I don't think Wellfleet did the full 6. I think Wellfleet is 4 point, for some reason, I think it's 4.5.
Right.
So anyway, I at least wanted to open up that discussion, obviously, since both Gary, you and Elaine are here, because we obviously don't want to be working at cross purposes on, we obviously are very supportive of, affordable housing, and we also want to figure out how to get wastewater plan funded too.
I think the issue is we should make common cause as opposed to contention about whether we can increase it or not, or whether we should increase it. There's a fairly significant both voters and the real estate group have reservations about raising it too high and having it be a negative effect for the town. But
my sense of it is, and my perspective is that when housing has come before the town for things in front of town meeting, you've gotten pretty close to unanimous support.
Sure.
You've had very, very strong support. So, given that the town's at 4.5 on its portion, if the town were to adopt the 3%, that would be a long-term commitment to affordable housing.
Kurt, one of the underlying things about the short-term rental tax is that almost all of the funding for affordable housing now comes from the CPA and the CPC. And that is a good source of money, but it's limited to 100% of AMI. And one of the charges that we have in the AMI being the median income for the Cape. So we have a number of folks, but particularly in the shellfishing industry, that are above that number, but are in desperate need of housing, both absolutely and to hold on to their grants. And so we were eyeing that short-term rental tax, which does not have a limitation, as being the source to fund that support. So I think that's one of the issues for us in terms of the attractiveness of that money. But again, I don't mean to suggest that it's a zero-sum game and we take it and you don't. So I think, speaking only for myself, I'm happy to suggest that we work out some kind of a reasonable sharing of it.
What do you think about going after the additional 3%?
Well, For one, I mean, it's like inviting the ants to the picnic, but,
Yeah.
but, I don't have a problem with it, but Elaine, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Mhm. I feel like both right now, housing and your group and our group have big things going on, and they're fairly related. And so I feel like if somehow for the next 5-year picture, we could work out a sharing, it's gonna make some major improvements in town. I mean, I think the town can decide where they want to put it, but it can change. I just see that both of us working on really big, important things right now, and we need all the help we can get. Kathleen Nagel, who's a realtor on the trust now, from her point of view, she said that the short-term rental people have no trouble paying the tax. They don't even blink. They pay it. So potentially adopting the 3% might be an option, but I just feel like we both have really valuable, important projects going on right now, and it would be nice if we could each have some access to
Mhm.
that funding.
Is there
Richard,
some way, is there a win-win here? Because I'm kind of thinking if like, you know, Gary, you were saying that there's a governor on the Community Preservation Act funds for
Correct.
housing. But is that same governor on, if we use Community Preservation Act funds for wastewater, and I think you can use Community Preservation Act funds for wastewater, is there that same governor? And thereby we can just say, okay, you guys get the rental tax if we can get some of the Community Preservation Act costs, and then it's a win-win because you don't have that governor on it.
I think where we'd have to tie it back is it either has to be wastewater for housing or wastewater for open space.
Yeah.
Those are, there are in CPC, there are 4 designated areas that you can spend the money: recreation, historical, open space, and housing.
Yeah.
So as
Well-
long as we can tie that back, which is not a stretch, then
No.
it's reasonable to look at using CPC funds, I think, to support that. And we do have a surplus right now in CPC. Again, we're waiting for the accounting, but let's call it roughly $1 million.
One of the things about this, this whole having to come up with a watershed permit and come up with a plan is that DEP's perspective is that, in theory, if they declare us, nitrogen sensitive, that would say you can't do anything without offsets.
Right.
So basically, without our wastewater plan, there's no housing. It doesn't matter whether it's affordable or otherwise. So that's kind of the where our back is against the wall. So all housing in the town of Wellfleet, not just affordable housing, depends on getting a wastewater plan in place.
But I'm still going back to like, there's different colors of money, okay, and and different strings attached to money. So I'm hearing that, that there may be some benefit to the housing folks to go after the short-term rental money because there are no governors on it, and for us to go after some of the CPC money because there are governors, because there are less government. There's somehow we could work the system in the colors of money.
Yep.
Both of us at the end, the best.
I mean, and for full disclosure, Elaine and I both sit on the CPC, and I actually chair the committee.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, we're very receptive to that type of, but it is it's not onerous, but it is schedule limited money. So the next time it has to be approved at town meeting, and we've already closed for this year.
Yeah.
So the next time that you could put in a grant for wastewater for the CPC would be October 15th is the deadline for the grant, and it would be for the 2022 town meeting, whenever that may be, to approve, unless there is a fall town meeting, and then we have a deadline of July 15th. So it's, if you're looking now for CPC money for wastewater, you got to be looking essentially a year and a quarter out.
one of the challenges in funding wastewater is, if you look at, if you look at those expenditures, we're talking close to $500,000, programmatically a year, just for the enhanced INA program.
Right.
And then if you include, O&M for 95 Lawrence, and you include oversight and management of the enhanced INA program, which is going to be required by DEP, that we do testing and monitoring. You're at 600,000 or 700,000, and that's just, that's going to be an annual expense. That that really is how we get to compliance.
We didn't. I mean,
The alternative is, and just to draw a distinction, those are ongoing budgeted, like, regular expenses.
Mhm.
And that's not related to a capital project, like, for example, putting in the actual treatment facilities, at 95 Lawrence, or doing something like a permeable reactive barrier, or doing the tide gates at, Mayo Creek, or House Pond, or so there's other project type things that would be, I think, amenable to a one-off. You come to town meeting, here's the capital expenditure. And you get that authorized for that particular project. Where I have heartburn is, there's already an underlying, ongoing, consistent amount of money that's going to have to go to wastewater, and I don't see how that's going to get done.
But that basic concept here was either you spend $150 million, you do what, Provincetown did, and put in a wastewater system and pay for it year in, year out of capital and operating budgets. I guess would be an operating budget thing because you're paying off a loan. Or you do, so in the case of Provincetown, I'm sure that loan is costing them $1 million a year or something like that, right? Or and it's just part of their yearly budgets. We do the same thing in Wellfleet, and only we say, okay, guys, it's going to be $500,000 a year for upgrades to cover those upgrades of systems to advanced ANIs. And we could start it as a pilot to see how well it works, but in the end, it's got to be part of the operating budget of the town, because otherwise we're going to have to put in a sewage, a wastewater plant next door to me. And then we're going to carry that debt, and that debt has to be serviced every year by operating funds. And that's the argument I thought we were always trying to make.
Right. Scott, why don't we shift over to your, that's a perfect segue, Fred, to what Scott's worked on for this meeting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Can people see this yellow highlighted option A?
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay. So what I've been working on is a 25-year plan. As you recall, we came up with a wish list of this year, which we talked about the last meeting, and some of the comments and feedback were, well, where are we going here? What's the long-term plan? And this is something I've been working on for a while, but I decided let's really crunch on this. And what I'm going to show you is something that is not complete, but it's probably 80% complete in my estimation. So some of these numbers need to be checked, etc. And I'll warn that as we go through that. Let me boil this down a little bit so you can see more of the spreadsheet. Is that, people read that okay about that scale? Does that look all right, Kurt?
Yeah,
I can see it.
Okay, so just quickly, what I did is I prepared 3 plans, and I've highlighted the names. Option A is the so-called non-traditional, which is really what we've been focusing on. And then plan B, or option B, is traditional sewers and treatment. And then option C is a combination, or is what we call a hybrid plan. And that partly came out of the last discussion we had, where there were a number of comments about, well, who knows, maybe we will need a downtown sewer at some point. So let me just walk through these really quickly, and then we can come back with, I don't want to go too quick, but I don't want to go too slow either, because there's a lot of details here. But first of all, as you can see, I've broken this down into 5 phases, each one a 5-year plan, and that tracks the Pleasant Bay permit. What I've been doing from the onset since I started working with the town of Wellfleet is try to mimic the Pleasant Pleasant Bay plan to the extent that I can, because that one was approved. So my theory is if we can do something similar, we ought to get approval, right? Who knows? Anyways, 25 years. The town of Barnstable, by the way, just as an example of who I'm also working with, they're another client, had a 60-year plan, 60. And based upon public feedback, they cut it back to 30. So the 25 years is not magic. And that can change. But that's what I get for starters here, okay? And then let me just scroll across the top here. Under the non-traditional plan, these are all the elements that we've been talking about. Everything from neighborhood collection, which is really the 95 Lawrence project, the enhanced INAs, stormwater and fertilizers, which the 208 plan gives the town a credit if they want to take it moving forward, the PRB, the shellfish, and then the restoration programs. You can see over here, I've got a total, and these are in kilograms per year reduction to meet, here's the goal, 20,250. That number stays pretty much standard in all three plans. That's a number according to the MEP build out, the highest build out. That's what we need to get to. Okay. So what I've done is broken, for example, the 95 Lawrence project, I've broken it in the first 5-year period. We design and construct phase 1, which is the housing and municipal. Phase 2, which is the neighborhood, goes off to phase 2 of the overall plan, and perhaps phase 3, who knows? And you can see I get incremental nitrogen reductions on that basis. Just to use one other example, and then we'll move on here. Under the enhanced INAs, which is the real driver in the program currently, the idea would be during the first 5 years, we'd install on the average, 250 systems over that 5-year period. So an average of 50 per year. And as you may recall, Hillary gave us some data earlier on that suggests that somewhere in the order of 60 or 65 repairs, upgrades, and new systems. So these would largely be focused on systems that are coming into the Board of Health for approval, as opposed to us knocking on doors and say, hey, you got to upgrade your system whether you like it or not. This is really geared to facilitate and take advantage of, and systems that are coming in for Board of Health review to begin with. And then over the next 20 years, these are the numbers that would be required to get to the threshold. That's where this 800 per 5 years comes from, okay? Now, without going through what I want to do now is just focus, just show you, whoops, sorry, keep getting my schedule in here. Try to remember these numbers. Actually, there's 2 variables here. One is, and this came out of, I've been listening, by the way, at these meetings. You guys have some great comments and input. So one of the other things I heard at the last meeting, which was a really good comment, was a question. Do we want to subsidize just the upgrades, or do we want to subsidize everything, meaning the new INAs going into the new house? Somebody wants to build a new house. We want to give them the 12 grand for that too, or just the upgrades? So I ran the numbers both ways. Okay, so A1 and A2. And just a quick forward, these are in millions of dollars. So if you only provide the subsidy for the upgrades for repairs and additions, etc., the whole program says 27 million bucks. That's total over the 25 years, which is pretty low price, I might add. If you do everything, meaning the new systems, that comes to 53 million. So just kind of remember that, and we'll come back to it.
And I just want to make one comment there too, Scott.
Right, go ahead.
Because the 27 or the 53, basically either one of those gets you to, I think it's like close to 3/4 of the town's overall requirement, if memory serves me correctly.
Requirement for reduction?
Yeah.
Well, I guess these numbers get you to 100% of the reduction. But if you look back here, if you look at these numbers, nitrogen reduction, you can see the 12,869 is by far the biggest number. Right?
Yeah, okay, so it gets us to, it's over half of the,
so
it's
that's
over
the
half of the
driver.
reduction. But I wanted to put that in perspective. I mean, you have it a little bit later, but for the purposes of our audience, if we were doing the sewer system to achieve the same level of reduction, the number would be.
Oh, perfect segue. Here we go, Kurt. Here's option B. So these numbers include the 95 Lawrence project, which, it sounds like the town's pretty committed to. And that gets us a little bit of the ways there. It gets us about 1,400 kilograms out of the 20,000. So something. But then what I've done is I've included additional sewering. And I start with, what I did is I looked at the Woodard and Curran report. And I took their downtown sewers and their so-called central district and their secondary district. And you can see this comes in phases, but that gets you to, these two numbers here, the 1783 and the 1257, again, these are kilograms per year, is what the Woodard and Curran report would provide for nitrogen reduction benefits. Now, let me just pause for a second and remind us all that when Woodard and Curran did the report for the town, the MEP report was not finished. So they did not have any idea on what nitrogen reduction was required. And as you can see, these are relatively small numbers to get to the goal. The big number is here, which is so-called phase 3, which is the rest of the town beyond the downtown sewering, if in fact that was the only solution that you wanted to rely on. And if you do that, the cost comes to somewhat shy of $200 million, if that's your only solution.
And how old is that Woodward and Curran?
Well, that doesn't drive the cost, Fred. What Scott's using for costs are current costs. What Woodward and Curran is doing is that was just a design for basically the central district, and then expanded beyond the central district, and then a phase 3 that I think included like Commercial Street. So it was just sections that they were engineering, engineering a system around, and then figuring out how many homes that would capture, and therefore how much nitrogen it could remove.
I know, but when I'm talking about the dollar figure, that dollar figure goes up every year by at least 3%.
That's right. Well, these numbers here are based upon $100,000 per home right here. See this note?
Yeah.
And that number comes from two sources, actually more than two sources, but the two sources I used are the Orleans wastewater facility, which has just been designed, permitted, and is currently under construction. Their numbers, and I rounded it off, their numbers come to $97,000 per home, plus anywhere between $5,000 and $50,000 for a connection to the street. So it's probably more than $100,000 per home, but I rounded it off here for $100,000. And then the other source is the Cape Cod Commission's MVP, which comes from a report that some of you may remember, done in 2000. I don't remember the date. Maybe 2012. The Barnstable County Wastewater cost report that was done by Wright Pierce.
DE's cost report, yeah.
And what happened during 2008, AECOM updated those costs because, as you just suggested, those costs change. So in both cases, those numbers come to about 100K per home. Now, I'll tell you, if you want to knock on Provincetown's door and check on their prices, they're a lot lower, and that's for two reasons. It was built a long time ago, and they have high density, very high density. And they have one strip going down Commercial Street. Pretty nice project for a sewering project. Going around all of Wellfleet and picking up South Wellfleet is a different story.
And you're only getting 197 homes.
No, that's not homes. This is $1 million.
I know, but you just said there was $100,000 per home.
Oh, right.
But if you say 100,000 per home, isn't that
right?
Am I doing my math right? 197 homes?
No, it's more than that. It's more than that. Is it 1,900 homes? It's got to be more than that. Hold on. It's a good question. So if we take 197 million, we divide by 100. Yeah, that's 2,000 homes.
Yeah.
About 2,000 homes.
Okay, and if you go up, we're getting, I mean, with these advanced A&I systems, we're doing How many homes are we getting there?
Well,
a
right,
good
there's
way- a good way to think
3,200,
about it.
about 3,400, right? And the difference is,
At a whole lot less, at $12,000 a home, basically.
that's exactly right.
That's the good number to think about. So it's 12,000 to do enhanced INA, or it's 100,000 to sewer it. Same result.
Better results. Because we
Well,
get,
yeah, I agree. I think it is better results.
So
for a
the
variety of
third,
other reasons, but
let me just finish up with what I got here. So the third option is a hybrid. And this includes over here on the centralized, includes 95 Lawrence. I'm sorry, 95 Lawrence is over here. On the centralized, it includes basically the Woodard and Curran phase 1 and phase 2. The downtown sewering. Because as you may remember, during the last wastewater committee meeting, we had some discussion. Maybe there's some validity to sewering downtown. And if the town decides to do that, they can do it. But what this does eliminate is the town-wide sewer, the big pipes going across the whole town, which is very expensive. So this is moderately expensive, but it includes that. And what that does is that cuts down the numbers of INAs required. You see these numbers here, 620 instead of 800. So it cuts down on, and also it cuts down on additional neighborhood systems. The end result is 60 to 90 million. So just to review those costs, according to my calcs, I'm going to round them off because these are rough numbers. 30 to 50 million for the non-traditional. Let's call it 200 for the big sewer, everything alone, and 60 to 90 for the hybrid plan. So that's what I came up with. I think DEP is going to require a linkage between some of these, meaning if the town decides they want to go with a non-traditional, there's going to have to be a linkage to probably this hybrid plan, meaning build some of this, if in fact the non-traditional doesn't work as well as we hope. So in reality, I don't think we can guarantee the town that we're going to get off the hook for $27 million. Over 25 years. And by the way, that's about $1 million a year, which would be, in my view, a bargain basement deal, if you can really do that. So I think that's probably too optimistic. So I would think this is a safer number, but there's some policy decisions here, which are important ones. And I certainly can't suggest what to do. This is a total town decision. And that really relates to, do you subsidize future development going forward? Because I'll stop in 2 minutes, but I want to say that, remember, when I started working with the wastewater committee, we talked about which targets we're going to go for. We're going to go for existing level of development and reduce that to threshold, or we're going to go for the worst case build out. And what we decided to do is the worst case build out. So, and I'll just switch back to this other sheet here. This is time independent. This is the whole plan. You can see that the health regulation for future septics, there are 2,654 future septics that need to be dealt with, and there's 1,500 existing. So this plan is largely influenced by future development. And as Kurt and I have talked, if you do a non-traditional plan and you don't opt to subsidize future development, it can be sort of a pay-as-you-go deal where you just simply tell new development that, hey, if you want to build a new home in Wellfleet, you got to put an enhanced INA system in, and that cuts it down from 50 million down to 27 million. So the future development is a big factor here. If you opted for option B, which is build the sewer, and you believe the build out, you are building a huge sewer system for a level of development which we can debate whether or not is ever going to happen or not. And I don't know the answer to that question either. But I do want to point out that all of these plans are driven significantly by future development. You can see the future development is a bigger problem, according to this spreadsheet, than existing development. And that's an important, I think, policy consideration. So I will stop there and see if there are questions, comments.
I have a
Is
question
there
for
any,
you.
is there any, go ahead.
I was just say, is the 20,000 reduction that's the target, is that based upon the full development? In other words, if
Yes,
you don't have the full build out and you don't put in INAs for the additional build out, you won't reach the 20,000. But you won't need it because you won't have the additional buildings? Will the target be lower?
if you had no future development in the town, this
Yep.
number goes down significantly. I can probably tell you how much. Actually, it's right here.
I just want to know if it was sensitive to that. If it's sensitive to that, then if you don't get the build out, you don't have to worry about missing out on getting that target because the
That's
target is lower.
So here are the numbers from the MEP study. So 40,600 is the MEP build out. The existing load at the time of the MEP report was, let's call it 29,000. The target is 20,000. So that means as of the MEP report, you need to reduce around 9,000. On build out, you need to reduce 20,000.
Okay.
Or put another way, Richard, you were exactly right. One of the neat things about doing enhanced IA is you don't have to guess what level of development you're going to get, because basically as development happens, you're reducing the load. So you're actually doing it in a timing way that doesn't overinvest when you do enhanced IAs. You know, as Scott said, if you build a sewer system for your entire build out, you're investing upfront in something that, you know, may or may not happen, and you're putting all your eggs in that basket. And if that load never comes, you spent the money and you didn't even mitigate anything because it didn't happen.
And let me throw in one other consideration here, since I am working with the town of Barnstable. As some of you may know, the plan in Barnstable is largely based upon future sewering. We are looking at enhanced INAs and other things, but right now it's pretty much based upon existing sewering. And that means expanding the Hyannis treatment plant significantly. And there's two interesting sort of variables with that. One is the town does not have a disposal area yet for that, interestingly. Wellfleet was required to prove out the transfer station, remember, recently? Well, Barnstable hasn't done that. They're over capacity at their existing site, and they've got some challenges on additional expansion sites. So that's one consideration. The second one is the town is currently party to a lawsuit. In fact, they are a defendant with the Conservation Law Foundation, who's saying they're putting too much wastewater in one place that's going to cause impacts to, in their case, Lewis Bay. So those are two other considerations with respect to putting all your eggs in one basket with a large wastewater plant in one location, as we can look at other towns on Cape Cod and see what's happening.
So, so I don't want to interrupt the, other questions, but, Elaine and Gary, this is the thing that gives me heartburn because I don't know where the heck this is coming from. Plan A, plan B, or plan C, it's, the cheapest thing we can't seem to fund. So I don't know what we can do. We can only present the numbers and the town has to start to make decisions, but that's kind of the black and white of it.
What are the other options for funding? I mean, like grants, loans,
Well,
revolving funds, all of those things,
yeah, let me just jump back to that for a second, because it's not all doom and gloom. If you look at here's the how do I do that? Can you see that a little better?
yeah.
So this is the preliminary grant sources. And Elaine, did I miss one still for 95? MassWorks, Rural Small Town, SRF, USDA?
Well,
you gave me a note last time and I wasn't sure I got it back in here.
I mean, CPA also is certainly money
Okay.
available for Lawrence Road. I can't remember if there were any others. I don't think so.
Department of, you look at the Department of Ag and all those USD, oh, there you go.
Yeah. So anyway, to your point, Fred, here we had looked at short-term rental tax, the SRF Smart Growth, USDA Rural, Cape Cod Water Protection Fund. So these are kind of like, what they afford the town potentially. These monies will tend to go away as other towns get their watershed permits. One of the advantages we have is being, first in line. We will be able to, I think, get some pretty significant grant funding. But as a percentage of the total cost over the next 25 years, it's anybody's guess. I think in the next 5 years, it wouldn't surprise me if we were able to get, 25 to maybe, 50 or even 75% of the budget funded through grants. But somewhere in that range. So, no doubt, but it's, none of this is guaranteed. It's anybody's guess. Here's the sources and here's the, the terms, but, we've got to go out, somebody's got to go out and do the work to pull that stuff in.
So going back, the A, B, and C here, part of me that kind of likes, C simply because it's that whole saying, build it and they will come. There's a huge need to build the infrastructure for business in the downtown and, for Wellfleet so that, we have businesses. You just think about every time we turn around, we get another art gallery where there is a restaurant or another clothing store where there's a restaurant, just simply because those septic systems just are super expensive. And you can't just every 5 years dig a hole, pour $100,000 in the ground and cover it up,
Well, with what, just hang on there for a second, Fred, though. One thing is also true, because we have town water, and because we have town water now coming up Briar Lane, the businesses in the central district, all of them are no longer beholden to, a septic criteria, meaning, their water is, they have town water available. So you can pretty much say, as long as the septic perks, you don't have to worry about location from a well. That constraint has gone away. That didn't used to be the case, and especially it wasn't true along Briar Lane. So the infrastructure and water infrastructure was a heck of a lot less expensive to put in than doing wastewater infrastructure. It's almost 10 times more expensive to put wastewater infrastructure in. So, but as far as growth goes, downtown growth, I don't want to debate it too much because I'm a big growth advocate. I love it, but there's a lot of people in town that don't. But at the end of the day, we have our job on the wastewater committee is to deal with existing loads and figure out how we're going to deal with existing loads. If somebody comes along and wants to do a big development downtown, as John Kumbler was saying, maybe affordable housing, maybe assisted living, or whether it's some other use. If somebody comes along with that type of use and says, I can't do it, but for the following, then the town can look at that and say, okay, let's go ahead with option C, I guess it is, and spend the $100,000 per connection and hook those guys up, because there's a real constraint. But right now, in my mind, it's only a theoretical constraint. I don't think there are real constraints. I
disagree. I mean, I think we have to maintain the infrastructure and the business that we have down there. And the only way we're going to be able to maintain it is to provide the infrastructure.
Well, we have it. They have water, and now they can put especially an enhanced IA system in there. No restrictions relative to size or location as far as wells go. And that used to be that was the constraint. Sarah, for example, at the Flying Fish, she had a really big problem at the Flying Fish with putting in a a regular, innovative, alternative system. She needed way too much leach field and way too much separation system to be able to locate her system far enough away from her next door neighbor's well. And that constraint has just gone away with, the line coming up Briar Lane. So you're for sure it was an issue, but for most of downtown, I don't think it's an issue, but we'd have to go look at specific locations and a specific project development to determine that. For the purposes of this wastewater plan, there's no downside to going ahead with something that's heavily reliant on enhanced IAs at $10,000 a pop, as opposed to, deciding a priori, we should already be thinking about $100,000 a pop.
Okay.
Kurt, if I can just throw one other thing in there. One thing that when we had a couple conversations with Maria, the town administrator, she heavily emphasized the need for public engagement in this process. And as you said, Kurt, there's different opinions about some of these items, and I certainly will be the last person to give my opinion because I'm not even a resident. But I think this is something that the wastewater, just my suggestion, that the wastewater committee might want to consider some public outreach and participation. I know you've done a lot already, and I admire you for hanging in here and doing this many meetings. But I think going forward, if there are clearly different options. Some are more expensive, some are less expensive, at least on paper. But I think at some point we should discuss, or my recommendation would be we at least discuss the possibility of more public participation in some of this decision making.
Yeah, and we're, in fairness to you, Scott, we're just at the point where I think it's becoming clear what the alternatives are.
Yep.
I think we now have a real good, long-term budget idea, what the results of that budget would produce, and the policy implications of each of the alternatives. So I think we finally have. I feel like we're starting to get some really good clarity now, and that allows us to present. Up until now, I'm not sure we'd have. It was like a dog and pony show. It's like, well, we know it's out there, but we don't. You don't know if it's bigger than a breadbasket or bigger than the Manhattan, the Brooklyn Bridge.
And I'm just like, it's the sticker shock that I think that I'm seeing here, and how we manage that sticker shock. Because no matter what we do, I mean, like, okay, say it's $27 million a year over 25 years, or $30 million. That's 1 point whatever million dollars, right? Which is, I mean, like, we're talking, what is Wellfleet's budget? $20 million a year?
24.
Okay, so your $1 million a year is a big budget item.
I think, as Kurt pointed out, there are a number of financing programs that we need to dig into a little bit more. The SRF will, provide that. SRF in combination with the Clean Water Trust will likely provide 25% forgiveness, as they call it, meaning grant part of that. There's also, as part of that Clean Water Trust, for smaller grants, and Wellfleet might qualify for some of these, up to 50%, 50% forgiveness. So, and then Chatham benefited tremendously on the NRCS rural municipalities grant program, which is also on Kurt's list. So there clearly are a number of viable financing and funding mechanisms, but Kurt's right, it's going to take some effort. I don't know how many. I know some of you have written grant, maybe all of you have written grant applications. I'm guessing you have, and it's not if you want to win, it's not an easy task, but certainly they're available.
Well, the other part of this whole thing is that, I mean, like, the global financial picture of the town, and whether they can, they can handle if we find 500,000 here, does the town have 500,000 towards it? Is that something that we want to start to engage with the finance committee on, and basically say, or is that not something that we, because these are the things that we've got to, plug into the town budget. Maybe the town budget can handle it right now. Maybe you can't. I mean, is this time to talk to the finance committee about like? Okay,
Yeah, I mean, we'll be, the point of trying to get to where we are now was to be able to present it to the finance committee and say, here's what this thing really looks like. And also the Board of Selectmen. We just haven't been in a position to do that. I think Scott's finally, gotten a lot of the work done now to be able to present that picture. And to, I think, also frame the public policy discussion. It's really, it isn't just up to us. It's obviously, it's a big issue for the town. And, we can do a forum. We will do Board of Selectmen meeting. We need to do the Finance Committee meetings in the next couple of weeks, and engage the town in a, much more robust discussion now that we have something to put our arms around. Gary, and I think you were going to try to say something earlier.
Well, I was just, so the warrant item that you had proposed, we put up there, there wasn't actually a total on it. So is that a $3 or $4 million warrant item for this year?
Yeah, the total for that item is I think it's like 3.3 million.
3.3, but some of the things, are they in fact capital expenses that you can actually borrow against?
Yes.
They all are, Kurt?
Let me just, are you guys seeing my screen?
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Not yet. Okay, let me, find my
Okay.
controls here.
Where I was going with that is that the town has never been in a better position to borrow. We recently had a bond offering, and we had a AAA rating, and it's going out at approximately $9 million at 1.85, I think was the percentage. So in terms of cost to the town, I'm not saying that's insignificant, but in terms of relative borrowing time frame, this is a good time to borrow.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt.
And so I would encourage you to think big now.
Well, yeah, we're trying to do that. And I'm also, Scott's done a great job of separating, capital expenses versus, operating expenses. So for example, on this slide, this $3.3 million budget,
Right.
Of that, the 10,000 for the 50 systems or $500,000, you could capitalize that. But it's an annual expense. So you'd be looking for 500,000 capital each and every year. The RME contract is an operating expense for testing and performance monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
With regard to Lawrence, 1.7 is the capital expense for the incremental cost of the cluster to hook up police, fire, and school,
I see.
as well as the associated pipes. The 52 is operating that facility going forward, and that's the town share. There's also a share that would be coming from the developer. I think the developer's contribution to this capital was around 700,000,
Right.
and I think the O&M contribution from the developer was, I think, around 20 something. So they're pretty modest numbers for the developer.
Mhm.
And they're fair. They're apportioned based on the loads that are being, dealt with, and the costs associated with, with the various components that need to get added. Looking at the permeable reactive barrier, this is really a pilot. So that's, it's not, it's something that you I think should be budgeted for in from a borrowing standpoint, a capital item.
That's the one thing that's right for a grant.
And it's ripe for a grant, of course. The salt marsh restoration, those are also probably ripe for a grant.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
another capital item. The shellfish propagation, that's really an O&M item. That's an ongoing annual type of a level of expense associated with mulch and seed and, stuff like that. So does that kind of answer your question, Gary?
Yeah, so just roughly, it's $2.5 million worth of borrowing, 2.7, something like that.
Right.
I guess all I'm saying is I would encourage you to think big for this town meeting in terms of that. The other observation I have is, are there wonderful grant writers in the wastewater area that we could tap into? Because we're not actually borrowing the money now.
That's right.
We're authorizing the borrowing of the money.
Right.
It will be, and it's really the needed cornerstone to go out and go out and solicit bids for it to show the commitment that we have to the project.
Right. And also the commitment to to the granting agencies.
Exactly
The
right.
town is committed to this.
Right. But I just wondered if we have the expertise to do that, or is that something that we can go out and quote unquote buy?
Well, given the amount of money that's available in grants and the size of this particular effort, to me, it would make perfect sense to engage a full-time grant writer.
Yeah, that's what I was.
They would pay for themselves just on this.
Right.
And
I
the town itself has additional grant writing needs. I can't remember the woman's name that she was the go-to grant writer for the town for a lot of years. And she is still doing grants. Her name came up at a
Elaine, Elaine, I'm
dredge
sorry,
task force
her name.
meeting.
But she
Her
did
name's
the
Alice Boyd.
DDBG, Alice Boyd, yeah.
Yeah,
Is that who
Bailey
you're
Boyd.
thinking
Emily, thank you.
of? Right.
You're welcome.
Are there other grant writers, Emily? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I love working with Alice Boyd, and I do think that you're on the track, right? I mean, we talk about the same thing in Truro as far as what are the grants that are coming up and what do we have that might be eligible, and our assistant town manager helps us with that. My DPW director works on those too. We all kind of, keep combing. So I think you could tap your staff for some of that work. And work with a company like Bailey Boyd, and you'd probably be pretty successful. And as far as the FinCom piece, just to backtrack a little bit, the money to be put aside for matches and things like that, but that's also something that Alice would, be able to help the town budget for and stay in schedule for what's going to be expected of what grants.
Great, thank you. That's very, very helpful. Is Alice available on could we actually get a big chunk of her time?
I would think so. I think you could, you should definitely send her an email and let her know that you're on the edge of a big wastewater project, and, have her scope her services for you. And that should be included in the tab for the project is ongoing yearly, grant writing for a while until these pieces kind of fall in place.
Yeah, because I see the potential there for probably 300 to 1.5 million in grants every year for the foreseeable future.
And if, I don't know if wastewater's her shtick. I know that she does specialize in certain things, but she could certainly steer you in the right direction for a grant writer for wastewater in particular. I see Scott's nodding his head. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think having a grant writer who's skilled at this is really valuable. But my sense is Wellfleet has a lot of resources, including the people on this screen here. And, I think getting people to participate and input and editing, you could probably put a pretty good grant application together. And as we've talked before, I think we have some really good stories to tell here that are really unique and would attract grant funders. I really believe that. So I think that's a great initiative to think about getting going.
So I don't know I guess we're probably not at a point to really make any motions or decisions on this, option A, B, C budget. I think it sounds like from what I'm hearing from the rest of the committee, we ought to be getting before the Finance Committee quickly, Board of Selectmen. What do you guys think as far as other things that we should be doing?
Is the 3% extra short-term rental tax on the town meeting?
No, it could be. It does require, we have to opt in. It would require a vote of town meeting to opt in. Gary was sensitive to how the realtors might respond, but if we're hearing from the broker, and I rent, so I hate the short-term rentals tax. I fought against it. Full disclosure, but our tenants are paying it. They're not batting an eyelash either.
What's the deadline on the town meeting warrant?
The town meeting is June 5th, and we are working under a loose deadline of the first week in April. It has to be approved by the select board, and then it has to be incorporated into the printed warrant that goes out, and that really takes 4 or 5 weeks, 6 weeks to do. So, I think early April is probably a realistic timeframe. Kurt, do you think?
Yeah, and we're gonna, we'll have, we should be on the Finance Committee agenda within the next week or so. Jim Hood and I are going to be presenting for both water and wastewater. The Board of Selectmen, have said they want to schedule this joint meeting. I don't know when, but it certainly would be, I would imagine, in the next 2 weeks. So we ought to get some, I would feel better, at least if the wastewater committee were to come up with something that's firm, sort of what you were talking about, Gary, is like, okay, here's what the number really looks like that we want for this warrant item. And, here's what the action plan looks like as far as, between now and then we can talk to, Bailey Boyd and see if, they would be a, willing participant. But we don't have the, despite Scott's very kind words about the people on the screen, a lot of us just don't have the resources to, be able to spend a lot of time on, for example, grant writing.
You have a new assistant ATA coming on who sounds like she's going to be really good.
We also had a great meeting with Heather Michaud, I think is her name, she's in the accounting department. And, so she was great too. I think she can help, especially with some of the financing elements, especially as far as municipal finance goes. But we still have a ways to go, I think, to be able to present this clearly to town meeting. What's the number? What's the plan?
I do hope, though, that the goal is to get there for this town meeting, because.
Oh yeah, we're we're trying to. Like,
I know.
I'm keeping. We're pushing.
Yeah.
I don't know, unless do Fred or Richard, are you comfortable that you've got a sense of, putting a number out on the table?
I think we absolutely have to put a number on the table. I think we also have to really engage with, and it's probably not this year because the town budget is probably somewhat fixed for this year already, right? But engage with, the finance committee and the people who develop the budget and say, okay, guys, we don't really have, understand, we don't want to get to a consent order where we have to start spending money. We should just start planning on spending money every single year for wastewater, and for housing. And, there'll be some years that we can supercharge our efforts with grants, but we should be always considering a certain operating and capital expenditures every year to be included in the budget. And how do we integrate that now? into the yearly budget, because, the $24 million gets, everybody wants a little piece of it, and we want a piece of it now too.
Richard, you usually have some wise advice.
Pardon? I think that we should definitely present the 3% option when we talk to the finance committee and the selectmen. I do think that we should redouble our efforts to focus on what's capital and what's ongoing, O&M, and try to get the town meeting to approve the borrowing of funds for the future, even though we don't anticipate borrowing all of it this year. And to the extent that we can look down the road and figure out what the capital costs are, we're better off borrowing the money now, even if we don't tap into it, than to wait for 3 or 4 or 5 years down the road.
And the thing that's troubling me is we have to do both. We have to do a capital ask, and we also have to do an O&M ask.
Yep. But I think we want to put as much as we can into the capital, because we can borrow for that. We can borrow cheap.
Okay, well, what I'd suggest at least is, I'd like to try to tie this off. So the committee at some point is going to have a come to Jesus meeting where we put a number on the table and something that we can, build a motion around, and at least, because we do have to make a recommendation. That's I think where it starts.
Scott, can you send your slide around so everybody can have it? Did you circulate that?
The spreadsheet that we talked about?
Spreadsheet, yeah.
I can do that. I'm hesitating just because I haven't checked. There's a couple of, if you notice, instead of numbers, there's a couple of question marks in there, things I'm still working on. But maybe what I'll do is I'll send it around with a disclaimer.
Yeah, put a big stamp
Right.
on it.
I need to, I'm still working on a couple of items, but I think it's, like I said, about 80%, right? And I know that time is important here, so I wanted to put something in front of you. So long answer, yes, I will send you something with some disclaimers on it.
So when do we have to come around? We have to congeal around a number. I mean,
we've got to. I think it's like next week, because if we're gonna, if warrant items have to be into the, if we got to be circulating a warrant item the first couple of weeks of April, it's the 23rd now, so of March. We're a week away. So we kind of, I think we've done enough work on this. I think it's really just kind of getting to some consensus. And Gary, I think, has been very, has been helpful both in terms of, making sure we go for a big ask, and also put as much in borrowing as you can. The other thing I would, also ask is that, to the extent that, Elaine, you or Gary have any suggestions or ideas for us, you're always we're both the poor people looking for money all the time. The hardest time getting it. But it's, vis-a-vis, CPC or other channels, because we want to pitch this at town meeting, as a win, and then whatever is going on with the housing ask, we don't want those things to be in conflict.
Emily, can I ask you a question? Emily? Maybe she's gone.
Hi, sorry, no, I've got 2 devices, sorry.
Is Truro bonding their CPA money for the, is Truro bonding CPA funds?
That's a good question. I can get the answer for you, but it's not my area, so you know how that goes.
I had heard something that they were doing that for the Cloverleaf, but.
Okay. I'll get
Anyway,
back
that's
to you on
another
that.
alternative, Richard. But I think you have at least a working number of 3.7 or 4 million to get it before the select board and the FinCom in the next 2 weeks.
yeah, I mean, like I can think we can deal around that number. pretty easily. It's just a matter of like, in that 3 point whatever, there's operating expenses.
Yes.
I mean, like, we can borrow against capital expenses. We can't on operating, we can, and that's the trick.
Mhm.
Well,
Am I
and also
getting
if we
that
go
correct?
for, and also if we go for the 3 point whatever, 3.3, let's just, let's say it's 3.3, that only funds 1 year of an enhanced INA program. That doesn't do year 2. It doesn't do year 3. I mean, do you want to go back to you want to go back to town meeting?
What do we
What's that,
ask for
Richard?
what do we ask for the 5 years to borrow the money for 5 years for the INA program? It's all capital, it's all
Right.
construction. I mean, part of this will be how the finance committee reacts.
Right, but I
We
think
can
we're,
go in saying what we recommend, but they'll have some thoughts too.
yeah, but I think this stuff is is complicated enough that we need to do as much homework to sort it out. At least, provide the information for folks so that they can kind of be looking at this in a realistic way. That's kind of why we did why I put the O&M in there for, for 95 Lawrence, Richard, because, you were saying, what's the town really signing up for here? And in reality, it's that number, forever, right?
So
Right,
in other words, it's not this year or even next year that they have to start thinking about integrating the operating expenses into the budget, but in maybe 3 years, we got to have that operating.
Right.
Got to be in the operating.
right, and that was Richard's, really good observation that we need to really look at this. But that's a good suggestion. If we do 5 years of the INA enhanced INA program as a borrowing item, that gives it certainty. It also gives it a period of time to get to general use.
What about adding in borrowing for the pilot program for the what is it called, the
PRB.
PRB too?
Yeah, I think the PRB and the tide gates ought to be, they're part of it anyway. The real question is how much do you put in there? And what do we put in for O&M?
Well, I mean,
if we cut the O&M down enough and put a big borrowing item in there, then the Airbnb, the short-term rentals tax could easily go to housing.
Hey,
Well, I
Kurt,
was just going to say the
just-
same thing, is that the operational money could come from, and the other thing we haven't talked about is the marijuana tax, which is bound to be coming to the town in the next year or so.
I'm sorry, Gary, what was that again?
The marijuana tax.
Oh.
Kurt, I was going to ask or suggest that if it's helpful, maybe you and I could spend a little time and break down your slide of costs into capital and O&M, and that might be helpful. And some of the O&Ms are, like you said, the INA is really 1 year. Arguably the town doesn't need to commit beyond 1 year, but it would make sense to give at least a few years to get this to general use and get the experience and monitoring data, which is really at the core of the non-traditional plan. And I might add the hybrid plan as well. So it seems to me that's a pretty big, an important consideration in what the town ultimately decides. From what I can see, if the INA thing doesn't fly, you're building some big sewers.
Yeah, that's a pervasive argument. At town meeting is pay me this or pay me that,
Yeah, I think so. And the no action alternative is not available anymore.
One question I had, Scott, $10,000 grant, what's the average cost to retrofit an INA system?
Well, I'll give you the short answer, Gary, but I'll also say there's a long answer. And the shortest answer is it depends, 2 words. It depends on the site. There's a lot of site site-specific considerations, but the way we've been looking at it is the subsidy would pay for the treatment system, which is I call it the black box. It's a concrete tank with wood chips and an aerator and some other devices. And the thought is we leave everything else up to the homeowner. Everything else includes getting an engineer, doing the design plans, the excavation, the site work, the landscaping after you're done, et cetera, et cetera. If you put all that together, it's probably like $30,000 or $35,000. But the thought is that to make this more cost effective, we look at marginal costs. If the town provides the treatment device and the homeowner is then responsible for maintaining a functioning system, whatever that might be, and doing the landscaping, et cetera, et cetera. And that's paired with the approach of only requiring this on new construction, repairs, upgrades, and additional bedrooms, et cetera.
Failed
So
systems.
all these cases where the homeowners coming to the town asking for a permit, as opposed to the town going to each homeowner and saying, hey, we got to clean up the harbor. You got to spend 35 grand to rip up your system and replace it. So depending on how that happens, the cost is very different. And my suggestion is we look at it on almost like an opportunity cost or marginal cost, and only assess that cost when somebody comes to the town saying, hey, I want to add a bedroom, or I want to build a new house, or I'm doing a Title V transfer and I have a problem, I need to fix my system. In those cases, they're already digging up their yard, they're already hiring an engineer, they're already doing landscaping, et cetera, et cetera. So those costs, at least in my mind, are not necessarily municipal costs. Those are costs that would go with owning a home in Wellfleet. And what that does is it changes it from 100,000 for the sewer to 35,000 for the full retrofit on the cost of the town, down to something like around 12 grand, which is what we're hearing from the vendors. We had John Smith come in from Nitro to present to the Board of Health, and his cost estimate for his part of the system was the 12,500.
So let me,
Hope the answer. It's a complicated question, but that's.
but the thing is that, but the other thing, but the cherry on the Sunday, so to speak, on this is like you go to this INA system, and guess what? You get to throw in another bedroom.
Well, that's right, and I was going to present that tonight, but we could do that at the next meeting. But I've done some calculations on the incentive. If the town offers an extra bedroom, or maybe an accessory dwelling unit for affordable housing, maybe they don't offer the $12,000 subsidy, because that's enough incentive for somebody to do that. And then you're getting people to do the upgrades at no municipal cost. What the town is providing is the permit to allow the additional bedroom or accessory affordable unit. And when I look at the nitrogen reduction, I sent the numbers to Kurt, and I can show it to you next time perhaps, but they go from, I'm going to estimate 85% reduction down to 79% reduction if you allow them the extra bedroom. So it's in other words, it ratchets down a little bit in terms of the water quality benefit, but it provides a significant benefit to the homeowner, and it probably removes most, if not all, the need for a subsidy. So this is something that and I've talked to a number of people about this, affordable housing advocates, and they like it. You know, it's a way to have your cake and eat it too. Let's upgrade the wastewater treatment. Let's provide more housing options at a lower cost. And that's why I'm excited about the option. Emily, you want to say something?
I'm sorry, I have a quick question. I love the way that you laid it out, and thank you folks for letting me join your meeting. I'm
thank you
thrilled
for joining us.
This is so great.
We need all the help we can get, Emily.
Well, we're right with you, 100%. We're all in this boat. So, you know, at my house, we just, we bought a house and had to have, some things done on it, and it had a fine septic system, a more current system. So we didn't have to do anything there, but we wanted solar panels. The roof was older, so we put in a new roof. Now it's got a 30-year roof and solar panels. A septic system upgrade is a normal part of having a house. So, I mean, I think there's a way of normalizing the argument so that it is, everybody's going to get a black box and everybody's going to have to upgrade your system. And I don't know, I know I'm coming late to this conversation, but if there's a way of scaling it somehow, so it's going to happen within a certain period of time, you can maybe normalize that for folks. I remember when Chatham was putting their sewer in, they had a lot of people who had put in IA systems who were really bent out of shape that they were have to tie in. And their argument was to the property owner was, you don't have to tie in for 10 years because you have that much credit already, right? Sort of thing.
Right.
So there's, I think, a nuanced kind of approach you can take to it for different scenarios.
Yep.
That might further, bring that nut down and then allow you to extend IA to a great great number more people than you were calculating.
Yeah,
So
Emily,
just
thank
throwing
you
that
for
in.
saying,
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. And I'll just add, one of the other models here is what many of the cities, including Boston, is doing, this thing called the Complete Streets Program. And
Yeah,
what
I
they're
know,
doing
Complete
is they're
Streets.
saying,
Yep.
okay, we're going to go dig up Charles Street on Beacon Hill because we want to put a new gas line on. But time out. Let's think about new crosswalks, a bike lane, some street trees for stormwater protection, some street dining, facilities, on and on and on. And the idea is we're going to dig up the street. We're going to shut it down for a couple months, police details, engineering, blah, blah, blah. Let's get it done. And if you look at it that way, the incremental costs go down significantly. And that's exactly what I'm thinking about for a suggestion here, that we don't go require everybody in Wellfleet or Truro, part of Truro, to put in INA within the next 3 years to meet this goal. What I'm saying is over the next 25 or more years, when you, the homeowner, as you're suggesting, Emily, decide you want to add a bedroom or you have to upgrade and come to us for a permit, let's then say, this is the time to do it. Because then the cost goes, in my mind, from 35 grand, which is what it would cost to dig up the yard and put one of these in from scratch, to a marginal cost of around 12 grand to add the magic box to the system.
So what,
Yep, go ahead, Fred.
Let me propose something else here, right? Is that we say, okay, guys, out of the box, we're going to give you 12.5 to cover the black box, and we're going to give you another bedroom for the first 5 years. After that 5 years, sorry, we're not going to give you the 12.5 anymore. We're only going to give you 5.
Oh, wait, hold on. The 12.5 is a one-time cost.
I know.
Capital.
This is like.
Oh, I see. After 5 years. Right.
After 5 years, the next group
In the
of people.
program after 5 years.
The next group of people, they're only going to get 5 grand, but they still will get the bedroom. And then after that, so now it's the next 5 years, and all of a sudden we kind of go, okay, all you're going to get is your extra bedroom. You have 10 years to get us the subsidy. Now you don't get the subsidy, but you still get that extra bedroom, right?
That's an interesting idea, because the systems we're talking about subsidizing are those that are approved provisionally by DEP. And some people arguably would say that's risky. Why am I putting in a provisionally approved system when I can put in a general approval system? The real answer is because the general approval systems don't work that well, but that's another story. So we're trying to incentivize them. So that's a really interesting suggestion, Fred.
The reason I say this is in 10 years, guess what?
Yeah.
Title 5 may be just, okay, guys, the hell with the provisional system now. We're going to all these A&I systems.
Yeah, you're right.
Have a
You're right.
choice.
Yep,
You know?
you're right.
So if you
Well,
kind of
Can I-
like,
Yeah, go ahead, Emily.
I just have two more thoughts. There are different screening criteria you could use to weed different folks out and put them in different buckets. If your house is served by a system that's a 1978 code system, you're already 3/4 of the way there. So you should be starting from scratch, right? And so that can get that person going sooner. And maybe, right now we're phasing out cesspools. By 2023, they'll be gone in Truro. And I think a proactive plan like that might be done, but it would be interesting to look at the data and see who's in your target area and what their septic system types are. You could also do it by flow. The smaller systems should be, pretty easy pickups for cost or over a certain size. You could just treat it differently. 440 being a good standard, but something that was, or 550, but something that was bigger than, that would go faster. I don't know. I think working within whatever your timeframes are for achieving your TMDL goals You could just
That's
set
a,
the
that's a good
spreadsheet up.
Yeah.
suggestion.
Yeah.
And, you
We
reminded
actually-
me, you reminded me of one other thought. I just want to remind, I think I said this at the last meeting. Two of the INAs that we've been talking about, the Nitro and the Nitrex, are producing data that would likely allow DEP to reduce the leaching area requirements size. And when we're talking downtown Wellfleet, you're absolutely right. There were some real limitations about lot lines and space. And the other added benefit of
Yeah.
these systems, in my mind, likely, I can't guarantee it, but it sure looks like it, that they're going to be able to achieve up to maybe a 50% reduction in leaching area requirements, which is a huge factor in some of the, I've sat in a few of the Board of Health meetings in Wellfleet for some of these systems downtown, and they're knocking up against lot lines and foundations, etc. There's not a lot of space there. So back to the point of what you were talking about earlier, Fred, and about, how do we allow development downtown? If you can cut the leach fields in half, that would help.
Well, I mean, it's not so much allow development, it's just to maintain what is there.
Right.
Because
Right.
every day that goes down, I mean, you get another vacant storefront or another vacant restaurant, and you basically say, okay, we can't, we can't survive having to, like I said, I look at the Lighthouse restaurant. It was something like every 10 years, they dug a hole, they poured $100,000 in the ground, and they covered it up.
When we, Fred, when I did the Route 6 renovation, so we actually had the original septic load for the restaurant.
Yeah.
And we put in a system that was, I think it was pretty close to what the restaurant's septic load was, and easily fitted on that property. If we had been able to reduce the leach field by 50%, that'd have been very, very small footprint. So, for a restaurant's a more or less extreme example in terms of the amount of wastewater flows, as opposed to probably some other uses. But going back to what Emily and I think Fred, you said earlier, I can foresee, doing a subsidy for 5 years. I think that makes a lot of sense when it's provisional. And then whether you have it or you take it away completely after 5 years, what that would at least allow us to do is to test a Board of Health regulation, for a 5-year period. It would allow us to test the systems to see what kind of performance we're getting. And as part of adaptive management, after 5 years, we'd say, okay, the subsidy should go away, or it should be cut in half, or it should be doubled because, these things are so good. We should be doing something else throughout the town in a different way, or whatever. I don't know what the answer is, but I think we will get data that will help us make a decision. And picking a 5-year period is consistent with, this whole wastewater permit process, watershed permit process, and also adaptive management. I think that's a really, really smart, thing. And that would also then justify why we want to do a 5-year enhanced INA capital ask now. Don't know how much we'll get for grants for it, but what I'm hopeful we can do is at least get something underneath, get some underpinnings to have this thing go forward.
And then watch. And then the thing is that if you brought that to the finance committee, where we're going to reduce the benefit, we're going to reduce the subsidy after the 5 years to like half, and then go away after 10. Watch the dollars go down for the total cost for A and C.
Well, Scott can run that as a scenario if you were to cut the subsidy.
Hey, Kurt, can I take 2 minutes and show the health regulation as amended? Because it really gets this. Let me just show this to you really quick. Can you see this Word document, proposed health reg?
Have you seen this, Emily, yet?
So this is the late.
Oops, she was
Emily,
muted.
you're muted, Emily.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this. Thank you.
Okay.
This is the most recent version, and I made these changes after our last meeting. So the change is really right here in the middle, 609. And the idea would be along the lines we've been talking about. It would differentially provide subsidies. So if there's the 12.5 for, sort of a regular upgrade, and then with no subsidy, but we'd allow an extra bedroom. And then the third option would be an accessory dwelling unit if it qualifies as affordable. And in those two cases, we're giving an additional bedroom or dwelling unit in exchange for the enhanced INA. I think what I heard tonight is we might this one here perhaps we might want to phase out after 5 years, and I can wordsmith that. But I think that's a really good suggestion to consider. But that's essentially what I think that's the only change to the reg. Everything else is the same what we've been talking about.
Well,
I think it does provide a nice integration of some, affordable housing incentives. And
yeah, I think you phase out the grant after 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
like after
anyway.
5 years, I mean, like it's just it also will drive people to go. You mean I'll get 12,500 and an extra bedroom right now if I do this right now? There might be a flood of people going, yeah, I'm upgrading. So I can get all of that stuff in the first 5 years, and that's not a bad thing because that'll jumpstart our nitrogen reductions.
Yep.
And I can see the other thing is that we haven't talked about transfers, real estate transfers. So right now we've been generally considering these things for failed systems or additions, new construction and additions.
Yeah.
But if we did real estate transfers, and there again, Emily, I was thinking about you on that one because at a real estate transfer, there's an awful lot of money changing hands, and that's as you indicated, a time when a lot of people do. It's when oftentimes you do find a failure, or there are issues there, and 12,500 to upgrade your septic system at that particular point in time is not a lot of money.
No, it's not.
And you had done, I think Scott had done some numbers on that. It really accelerates the nitrogen reductions.
The other thing you could consider is what Provincetown did when they were gearing up for their sewer using an ACO system, Kurt, who was basically folks that were transferring deed and there wasn't septic capacity yet, but they were going to be guaranteed a spot on the septic train. So they basically paid into it at the transfer when it happened. They were allowed to stay where they were with that system until the sewer system was ready to go. The same thing could apply here, where there's a transfer that is happening before these funds are available. And you're putting a pin in that one, a pin in this one, and these are all folks that are going to get the grant when the grant money is available. But you're talking about this for this Springtown meeting for FY22, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that wouldn't really apply.
Well, what was the amount? Do you remember that they were putting aside?
I think it was about 10 grand. It depended on the size. Yeah, so like a normal house was about $10,000. It was based on your GPD.
Perfect. Well, I think we've had a really productive meeting. We've got a bit to think about. We've kind of gotten through the agenda. Scott was able to put up the Board of Health regulation. Does anybody have any kind of closing thoughts or?
Yeah, I think I like Gary's thought about, like, let's go big. Let's try to put as much stuff into, capital improvements, the tide gates, the PRB systems, let's just go for it. And also, like I said, let's see if we can't, because, go after what, if we're going after grant money and everything and we're out of the box quick, that money's going to dry up after 5 years, 10 years. Maybe we should start to think about, okay, after 5 or 10 years, no more assistance with this anymore, guys. Because there was a gravy train which you could have gone after before for the last 10 years. And B, in 10 years, these A&I systems will be just normal systems, for lack of.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And And the state may adopt them as the new Title V, saying, why can't we just adopt these across the board? When you build a new house, you're going to put in this system and you have to put a septic system in. This is a septic system you're putting in, I don't know, Emily, I don't know if there's a lot of, appetite for that just yet, but in the next 10 years, these two efforts are going to have to merge.
It's something that all health agents dream about. What I've heard is that the DEP's concern about it, and Scott, if you've heard anything different, please, is that the wood chips are fill, and that the fill is an issue that they have, that they don't know the length of time that it's going to survive. The estimate is 25 to 75 years, but that the use of fill for the system is a problem.
Is the word using fill, F-I-L-L?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think there may also be a private, aspect of this, that the BioClear folks, the Fast folks, the Elgin folks, all of these, canned products, that they would, I'm sure, want to lobby against something that was, a crowdsourced plan.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote a comment. I wrote a comment letter to DEP today, which I shared with Kurt, which promotes exactly what we're talking about. The longevity of the wood chips looks like it's on the order of decades, according to the best researchers, 20, 30 years. The cost of replacement is minimal. If you've had your septic system pumped, it would probably take less time to replace the wood chips than it does to have your septic system pumped. It's supposed to pump the system every 3 years, roughly 3 or 5 years. You replace the wood chips once every 20 years. This is not a big deal. It's low cost, easy to do, not a big factor. Yes, it's part of the program, but it's pretty minor.
But I think you're right, Fred. I think we're going to see that will be the standard. It'll go to that. So if you take away if you think about reducing the subsidy at year 5, whether it's away completely or half, boy, does that change the cost for, getting this stuff done.
Yeah.
And I think there's a good, good argument to be made. I feel that we should subsidize now because they're provisional systems and there's extra risk, and we need to get them to general use. We want to get a bunch of them in the ground. So there's a lot of reasons to get that done. And, as Scott pointed out, we're only paying a third of the cost of what it, would normally be to do a new septic system. It's just, to me, that's a no-brainer. We actually did, Emily, an assessment. I think it was like 10 years ago. We looked at all of the building permits across town to specifically see where the new construction was going. And I actually have a spreadsheet where we've got percentages by the 35, I think it is, watersheds within the town of Wellfleet. So a percentage of new construction that was typically going into each of those watersheds. So we actually can do that. We could map out where these benefits would largely come from, which is something we could definitely do.
We got to come up with a number. So what about, and we've been going at this for almost an hour and 45 minutes.
Fred, let Elaine jump in there.
Just a quick question. Because these systems are provisional, does that mean the couple of really good loan programs that are out there for people that have to replace a failed system wouldn't be eligible for them? Because there are a couple of really good loan programs.
Well, we did talk to the people at Barnstable County that run the septic system Title V upgrade program. And not only did they say they thought they could fund this, but they were excited about it. Now, that was Jack Units, who is the Barnstable County administrator, who's since left.
Right.
But it was also, I think we had George on the phone, George Hoyfelder, but we also had Brian Bumgartle on the phone, and also Sean O'Brien. So I guess I'm spreading a rumor, but it's one that was a legitimate rumor that, they were all over it, and they thought that program could fund these, even though they're provisional.
Well, and
But
also,
I would defer to them. I don't want to speak for them. I'm just telling you what I heard.
but
I would
also,
defer to
Scott,
them.
the funding is going for a traditional Title V septic system. We're putting in a subsidy for the black box.
Right.
So the
Right.
loan is going for a traditional system. There's no difference there.
Yeah, I think we
That's
need
how
to get an
did our
answer for
septic
them.
System
Yeah.
25 years ago, and it was great.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, Fred, go ahead.
No, and what I was just gonna say is that like we've been going on for an hour and 45 minutes, and like I'm kind of going, all right, let's do let's figure out what we're gonna do. We're gonna come up with a number, and that'll be the gist of our next meeting. Let's come up with a number.
Yep.
And
I
when,
think we've got a lot of good takeaways here, in terms of, some real good thinking that's gone into this. For
So-
Scott to,
can we schedule another meeting for next Tuesday?
yes.
Because we're gonna have to put this on. We're gonna have to put this on the warrant. We're gonna have to talk to the selectmen and the finance committee, and and this is like I say, we put it on the warrant for basically fiscal year 2022, but we may not spend it all or in 2022.
Right. How does, I can't do Tuesday because I got a Board of Water Commissioners meeting, but Monday or Wednesday?
Yeah,
Wednesday
I'm good
sounds
on either
good.
one of those dates.
And can we do 6 o'clock
Wednesday doesn't work for me.
Monday? So Monday or Thursday?
Monday or Thursday.
Yeah, either day
All right.
for me.
Monday's
Monday,
good for
what
you,
time are you
Fred?
thinking on Monday, Kurt?
6 o'clock?
Yep.
Will that work?
6 o'clock?
You want to do 4 o'clock?
You talking 6 o'clock at night?
Yeah, I can't do 4. I can only do as early. I can do 6, or I could do something like early in the morning.
I'm good.
Yeah, all right. I
6.
can-
I'm sorry. We're just coming up with a number, Richard.
I can do morning or 6 o'clock.
I can do any of those times.
All right. Elaine, Gary?
I'm more awake in the morning.
Right.
Oh, my.
So Monday at 6. I'll get that into Rebecca tomorrow and get it posted.
Yeah, and
You're-
Kurt,
Gary?
Just that you should schedule that select board working meeting just as soon as possible, because you're really bumping up against the end of March. If you really want to get it onto the warrant for this year, it's got to be early in April.
Right. Yeah, they were going to schedule the meeting. Rebecca was supposed to get back to me. This was 2 meetings ago, I think. So the ball. They said yes, and they were gonna work on a time.
But I had one question, Scott or Kurt. We don't have that many building permits. How many new builds do we have in town in a year? A
The
dozen?
number that Hillary gave me included upgrades, repairs, and new builds, so I can't separate it out, but that number was 65 per year on average.
65, that includes the failed systems, new builds. And,
Yes.
And
So I don't know how many are new. Kurt, you've
That's
been
right. So
researching
you
a
have,
little bit.
but you have a population of 65 to draw from.
Correct.
Yeah, that's terrific.
I think
Definitely
so,
over
yeah.
5 years. I think maybe you should up the number.
Well, if you added real estate transfers, it would probably go up to, I don't know, close to 100, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
over 25 years, that's 2,500 systems, which is exactly what we need.
Okay, thank you.
Someone want to make a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
So, is that a second, Fred?
that's a second. I mean, my other phone's ringing.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thank you very much. Great meeting. Thanks, everyone.